Imagine this. A quiet, peaceful day in the park turns into a nightmare. Sam Greene, a black veteran who's given his life to serve his country, is walking his loyal dog, Buddy, a small beagle with a big heart. Out of nowhere, a racist cop, Officer Frank Mitchell, decides to show his true colors. Frank doesn't just attack Sam in broad daylight. He starts by viciously kicking Buddy, sending the helpless dog flying through the air. And then, as Sam rushes to protect his dog, this so-called officer of the law unleashes his fury, brutally punching Sam until the veteran's head hits the concrete. But Frank doesn't stop there. No, he kicks Sam even while he's unconscious, laughing as if this defenseless man and his dog mean nothing. This isn't just an abuse of power, it's pure, cold-hearted cruelty. But here's the twist. Frank doesn't know Sam's son is David Greene, the Attorney General, and he's not about to let this slide. Want to find out what happens to Frank? Then subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because this is a story you don't want to miss. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Sam Greene took his usual walk through the park, with Buddy, his loyal beagle, trotting beside him. Sam, a decorated black veteran, had seen enough conflict in his life, but today, the real battle was waiting for him right at home. As he neared the park's center, a heated argument drew his attention. Officer Frank Mitchell, notorious for his abuse of power, stood face to face with a young man, Jason Turner. You could feel the tension in the air as Frank hurled insults, laced with racism, towards Jason. Without missing a beat, Sam stepped in, calm but firm. "That's enough, officer," he said, his voice steady. "We've all got a responsibility here to keep things civil." But Frank wasn't one to be talked down to, especially not by Sam, whose reputation for standing up to injustice had always irked him. "Oh, look who we have here, the hero of the hour," Frank sneered, turning his attention away from Jason and towards Sam. Sam had always been the kind of man who believed in resolving conflicts with words, not violence. He stood his ground, trying to defuse the situation before it escalated. "There's no need for this, Frank," Sam reasoned. "We're all just trying to get home safe, like you." But that only seemed to fan the flames. Frank's lips curled into a twisted grin. "You think you can tell me how to do my job?" he spat. "You people never learn, do you?" Jason, visibly shaken, took a step back, but Sam stayed rooted. "We've all got rights," Sam replied, meeting Frank's cold stare with one of calm resolve. But anyone watching could tell this wasn't going to end peacefully. Frank's temper was rising, and when someone like him feels threatened, they act on impulse, not reason. Sam could sense what was coming next, but he wasn't about to back down, not now. Buddy, sensing the growing tension, barked softly at Sam's side, as if to remind his owner that he wasn't alone. Frank's hand twitched, hovering over his belt, as if contemplating the next move. It was clear that this confrontation wasn't just about a simple argument anymore. It was about power. Frank saw Sam not just as a civilian, but as a challenge to his authority, a symbol of everything he despised. "Walk away while you still can," Frank muttered, his eyes narrowing. But Sam, with decades of experience fighting for justice, wasn't about to let this bully get the better of him. "I'm not the one who needs to leave, Frank," Sam said quietly, the weight of his words hanging in the air. And in that moment, the die was cast. The crowd that had gathered sensed it too. The question now was, what would happen next? The tension snapped in an instant. Without warning, Frank's boot came crashing into Buddy, sending the small beagle flying through the air. The crowd gasped in shock, and a horrified silence fell over the park as Buddy hit the ground with a heart-wrenching yelp. Sam's eyes widened in disbelief. "Buddy!" he shouted, rushing towards his injured companion. But Frank was already on him. Before Sam could react, a fist smashed into his face, knocking him off balance. "You think you can stand in my way, old man?" Frank growled, his face twisted with cruelty. Sam stumbled, but remained upright, fueled by adrenaline and the need to protect his dog. Yet Frank wasn't done. The officer lunged at Sam again, this time with a force that sent the veteran sprawling to the ground. "You should have stayed out of it, old fool. This park ain't for your kind." The crowd, frozen in shock moments ago, now erupted in screams and shouts of protest. "Stop him! Somebody stop him!" cried a voice, but no one dared to intervene. Frank, emboldened by the lack of resistance, continued his assault. He towered over Sam, who was trying to get up, and unleashed a brutal kick to the veteran's ribs. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Just because you wore a uniform, you're nothing!" Sam gasped, his vision blurring as pain surged through his body. He could hear Buddy whimpering in the distance, helpless and hurt. With one final, sickening punch, Frank knocked Sam's head against the hard concrete. "This is what happens when you try to be the good guy," Frank sneered, standing over Sam's motionless body. "Guess you're just as useless now as you were back then?" The onlookers could hardly believe what they were witnessing. An officer, sworn to protect, beating a defenseless man and his dog in broad daylight. Some had pulled out their phones, capturing every moment of the horrific scene. A woman in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, cried, "Someone call an ambulance!" But for Frank, the damage was already done. He stood there, smug and unremorseful, basking in the fear and chaos he had caused. "Look at him," Frank spat, kicking Sam's limp body once more. "Just another washed-up nobody. Pathetic." As Sam lay unconscious, his blood pooling on the pavement, the officer turned and walked away, as if what had just happened was nothing out of the ordinary. But little did Frank know, the consequences of his brutality were only beginning, and this was far from over. Sam was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, his life hanging by a thread after the brutal attack. Little Buddy, still injured, was taken in by a family friend, while Sam's condition worsened. Dr. Robert Hayes, the attending physician, couldn't believe it. Sam Greene, the decorated veteran who had always stood for justice, now lay unconscious, battered by the very system he had defended. As news spread, the hospital quickly filled with concerned friends and community members, but it was David Greene, Sam's son and the Attorney General, who arrived with the most weight on his shoulders. Seeing his father's broken body, David felt the gravity of the situation hit him like never before. His father, the pillar of strength, was now vulnerable, and Buddy's helpless whimpers only deepened his resolve to bring Frank Mitchell to justice. The doctors delivered a grim update. Sam had fallen into a coma, and his chances of waking were uncertain. The blow to his head had caused severe trauma, and recovery, if it came at all, would be long and difficult. David, standing at his father's bedside, was overwhelmed by the image of the man who had always been so strong, now lying frail and motionless. It was personal now. The memories of his father's bravery and integrity fueled his determination. He knew that this fight wasn't just for Sam, but for everyone who had suffered under Frank's cruelty. This was only the beginning of the battle for justice. It didn't take long for the video of Frank Mitchell's vicious attack on Sam and Buddy to go viral. Within hours, social media exploded with fury, and the footage was being shared worldwide. People from all walks of life couldn't believe what they were seeing. An innocent man and his dog, brutally attacked by a cop with a known history of abuse. Protests erupted across the city, with people carrying signs that read, "Justice for Sam and Buddy." The outrage wasn't just about this one incident. It was the tipping point for years of pent-up anger over racial violence and police brutality. The attack on Sam Greene had become a symbol of everything wrong with the system. But what fueled the fire even more was Frank Mitchell's brazen response to the outcry. Rather than lying low, Frank seemed to revel in the attention, making public statements that only deepened the community's outrage. Frank showed no remorse, instead doubling down on his actions. In interviews, he smirked and shrugged off the attack as if it were nothing. "I did what I had to do. That old man should have known better than to stick his nose where it doesn't belong, Frank said, his words dripping with contempt. When asked about Buddy, the dog he viciously kicked, he sneered, "It's just a dog. What's the big deal? I see strays on the street every day. Why should anyone care about this one?" His words ignited a new wave of fury, as people couldn't believe the coldness with which he dismissed the lives he had shattered. Frank's arrogance seemed boundless. "These people out there protesting, they don't know what it's like to be a cop. You think I'm worried about them?" He laughed. "I've been through worse. Let them scream all they want." As the protest grew larger, so did Frank's disdain. Instead of apologizing, he seemed to enjoy provoking the public. "Look, I've been in this game long enough to know how it works," he boasted during one particularly infuriating interview. "People forget. A few weeks, and they'll all move on to the next big thing. You think they can touch me? I'm not going anywhere." His smug attitude, his complete lack of empathy, sent waves of rage through the community. Every word he spoke was like gasoline on the fire, fueling more protests, more anger. People were no longer just demanding justice for Sam and Buddy. They wanted Frank gone. But Frank's arrogance convinced him he was untouchable. "These people think they can take me down?" he laughed. "I've been doing this for years. Nothing's going to change." But little did he know, this time, the community wasn't going to let it slide. They were done with the likes of Frank Mitchell. David Greene, now at the helm of this storm as Attorney General, was determined to see justice served. When he first saw the footage of his father being beaten and his beloved dog kicked like a piece of trash, something inside him snapped. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was deeply personal. David knew he had the power to take down Frank Mitchell, but he also knew that Frank wasn't the only problem. The system that had protected officers like Frank for years needed to be dismantled. As David launched an investigation, every stone he turned revealed more filth. Frank wasn't just a rogue cop. He had a history of racism, violence, and connections to far-right extremist groups. David couldn't believe the breadth of corruption that had allowed Frank to thrive unchecked for so long. It wasn't long before David uncovered the truth about Frank's past. Digging into old files, he discovered that Frank had been involved in the suspicious death of a young black man years earlier. The family had mysteriously disappeared after pressing charges, and David suspected they had been threatened into silence. "This isn't just about my father anymore," David told his team, pacing in his office late one night. "This is about every single person Frank has terrorized, every life he's destroyed while hiding behind his badge." The more he uncovered, the more twisted the story became. Frank wasn't just a violent cop. He was part of a network of officers who covered for each other's crimes, forging evidence, silencing witnesses, and protecting their own. It was a web of corruption that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. One of the most shocking discoveries came when David uncovered that Frank was responsible for his own father's death, a man who had been an honest police officer standing against corruption. The case had been conveniently ruled an accident, but David now had proof that Frank had coldly orchestrated the entire thing. "He killed his own father," David muttered, barely containing his rage. Frank wasn't just a monster to the public. He was a traitor who destroyed his own family to protect his corruption. The worst part? Frank carried on without an ounce of remorse, acting like he was untouchable. "That vile bastard killed his father just to cover his tracks," David thought, seething with anger. Frank's cruelty seemed endless, and the more people learned about it, the deeper their hatred grew. David was torn between two worlds, his role as Attorney General and his role as a son watching his father fight for his life. The image of Sam lying in a hospital bed haunted him, but it also fueled his determination. Every time he uncovered more about Frank's dark history, David knew he wasn't just fighting for his father. He was fighting for every victim of Frank's cruelty. The investigation quickly revealed a corrupt system that went far beyond one officer. Frank was part of a larger network that had covered up abuse for years. With every piece of evidence David found, the case became more dangerous. Threats poured in, but instead of backing down, they only strengthened his resolve. Let them try, David thought, ready to take on whatever came his way. Despite the pressure mounting from all sides, David pushed forward. The emotional toll of seeing his father in a coma weighed heavily on him, but it didn't break him. Each testimony from victims who had been too afraid to speak before only fueled his fight. The stakes were higher than ever, but David was determined to tear down the system that had protected men like Frank. They think they can scare me off, but they don't know who they're dealing with, David thought. The battle wasn't just about justice for his father. It was about dismantling a corrupt regime, and David wouldn't stop until every piece of it crumbled. As the trial approached, David uncovered a shocking connection that turned the case upside down. Frank Mitchell's crimes ran deeper than anyone had imagined. While preparing for the courtroom, David discovered that Frank had been part of a criminal network responsible for not just his individual acts of brutality, but for orchestrating a system of corruption within the police force. The network had been forging evidence, threatening witnesses, and framing innocent people for years, all under the protection of corrupt officials. But the most devastating revelation came when David learned that Frank was directly responsible for framing his own father, a man who had dedicated his life to fighting corruption in the force. Frank had betrayed his family to cover his own tracks, leading to the death of an innocent man. The layers of betrayal were staggering, and David knew this wasn't just a legal case anymore. It was a war for the truth. In court, David laid out the truth piece by piece, revealing the horrifying extent of Frank's deceit. As the evidence unfolded, it became clear that Frank had not only manipulated the justice system, but had destroyed countless lives in the process. The jury, visibly shaken by the revelations, watched as David exposed Frank's lies, including the betrayal of his own father. "You didn't just kill an honest man. You killed your own blood to protect yourself," David declared, his voice filled with righteous fury. Frank's cold, smug expression finally began to crack as the weight of his actions came crashing down on him. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was palpable. Everyone could feel that the truth had finally surfaced, and Frank Mitchell was about to face the full force of justice. The courtroom was electric with anticipation as the trial unfolded, turning into a spectacle of horror as every detail of Frank's brutality and corruption was brought to light. Witness after witness testified, revealing the ugly truth behind Frank's facade of authority. The public, who had once seen him as just another cop, now understood the depth of his cruelty. Frank at first remained smug in his seat, as if he still believed he could escape justice. "You people are soft," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for some to hear. "You cry over a dog? It's just an animal. I've shot strays before and never blinked." His words hung in the air, chilling everyone who heard them. But as David presented the overwhelming evidence, attempted murder, animal cruelty, abuse of power, and conspiracy, Frank's confidence began to waver. His lack of remorse was clear for all to see. "If I had to do it again, I would. That dog was a nuisance, just like its owner," he said coldly, not caring that his words sent a wave of disgust through the courtroom. As the trial neared its conclusion, Frank's psychopathic nature was fully on display. Even as the horrific details of his crimes were recounted, he showed no sign of guilt or regret. When questioned about Buddy, the dog he kicked so viciously, Frank just shrugged. "I don't get why people are so upset. It's not like it was a person," he scoffed. His cruel indifference to both animals and people shocked the courtroom, but he wasn't finished. "The world is full of weaklings. If they can't take it, too bad for them. That's just how it is," he added, almost laughing as he recalled his acts of violence. The jury looked on in disbelief as David recounted the long list of crimes, each one more chilling than the last. "You've hurt too many people for too long," David said, his voice steady but burning with a sense of justice. "And now, it's over." When the final verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in applause. Frank's life sentence was met with a collective sense of triumph, but even as he was led away, he sneered. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "I'd do it all over again." But this time, no one was listening to him anymore. Against all odds, after months of uncertainty, Sam finally opened his eyes. The room was quiet, but the beeping of the machines was now a sign of life, not just survival. When he woke, the first thing he saw was Buddy, curled up at the foot of his bed, tail wagging softly as if he had been waiting all this time. Sam reached out weakly, his hand trembling as it touched Buddy's fur. "Hey, boy. We made it," he whispered, a faint smile crossing his face. His family, who had been by his side every day, could barely hold back their tears. The community, who had rallied for Sam and Buddy, erupted in joy at the news. Sam's recovery wasn't just a personal victory. It was a symbol of resilience, of standing strong against unimaginable cruelty and coming out the other side, scarred but undefeated. Buddy, fully recovered from his injuries, never left Sam's side during his long rehabilitation. Sam, though physically weaker than before, carried the same unshakable dignity that had defined him all his life. As he slowly regained his strength, the community that had protested for justice continued to support him. They saw Sam as more than just a man. He was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found in unity and perseverance. "You're stronger than you think," people would tell Sam, and he would smile, humbled by their words. But it was the community's strength, their unrelenting demand for justice, that had truly brought him back. David, too, emerged from this battle, not just as a son who had fought for his father, but as a hero to the entire city. His unwavering determination to expose Frank and dismantle the corrupt system brought sweeping reforms to the police department. Corrupt officers were removed, and new policies were put in place to ensure that justice, fairness, and accountability were restored. Frank, now serving a life sentence, was a distant memory, despised, forgotten, and left to rot in prison for the rest of his days. Sam and Buddy, against all odds, had come through the storm together, and the community celebrated not just their recovery, but the lasting change that their fight had inspired. The scars of the past remained, but in the end, justice prevailed. The story of Sam Greene reminds us that even in the face of cruelty and injustice, resilience and the pursuit of justice prevail. It shows that no one is untouchable, no matter how powerful they may seem, and that standing up for what's right can change not only a single life, but an entire system. When darkness reveals its ugliest side, it's our response that defines the future. What would you do if faced with such evil? Let this be a call to action. Speak out, seek justice, and never stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. If you're ready to discover how this fight ends, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter in this powerful story.